I started what I think was starting to document what I call a social heritage. And unlike a lot of cities in the world, in Jakarta you've got old and new, rich and poor, all together. It is just a jumble of every different type of social strata. It is so dramatic, the changes or the contrast between them. I came here to Indonesia in the end of '88 actually with my wife. We came because she was working on a Canadian aid project here in Indonesia. The very first things I noticed when I came here, oddly enough, when I was driving around in the city looking for a house, I noticed that the Indonesian flag was a red and white bar, which is the top 2/3 of the Dutch flag. And I thought, how interesting. This used to be a Dutch colony, and the Indonesian flag, but without any understanding of how the Indonesian flag was created. In my own mind, I set about doing some paintings, which I more or less just did for myself. Of course, I was eager to travel everywhere, and there were just so many opportunities. Of course, the first place that most people go to is going through central Java to Jakarta, going to Bali, central Kalimantan. I've been to many of the other islands. And so what I've done in those circumstances where I've traveled, I've tried to bring back pictures, either photographs or pictures in my mind or sketches or ideas to show the rural beauty of Indonesia. And during those early to mid-90 years in Jakarta, the changes were phenomenal. It was just amazing. If you left the city for 2 weeks, you'd come back and all of a sudden there was a 12-story building and you say, where did that come from? I mean, it happened so quickly. Because we came just before the real big economic boom that was happening in Indonesia in the 1990s. The end of '93, early '94 was a big conflict between the congregation from the mosque and the workers or the owners of the Danemen Towers, because they wanted to build the Danemen Towers here and take away all of the mosque and this whole area, and there was a big fight between the workers and the congregation, and anyhow a settlement was made that they could allow the Danemen Towers to continue and the mosque could also stay. But now, of course, the view has changed completely because the towers are there, and about this angle here. And again, it's totally changed. The Dharmala Sakti building in the background, of course, is still there, but the Danemen Tower is new, and the renovation to the Masjid Hidayatullah is still quite different. The whole profile changed. Of why there are no people in most of the images that I do, and what I set out to do was to show the environment in which the people are living, and especially in the rural situation here, urban situation in the city. In rural areas, of course, I'm more of a purist landscape artist, where I don't have water buffalo or little kids playing, flying kites or what have you. I kind of stick to the more of a Western tradition of just the landscape itself. The point is to remove the people, because what I wanted to show is that when you have whether it's a painting or drawing or whatever, as soon as you have the human figure in that piece of art, that becomes the focal point, and your eye will go to the person, which means that everything else falls into the background. And what I wanted to do is bring that background to the foreground. The nice thing about doing a drawing or a painting is, of course, you can improve on what you see. In other words, you can make it a higher contrast. If, for instance, you're looking at a scene that doesn't have a strong enough shadow base to really make the contrasts that are necessary, then I would make notes to say, have the light source, change the light source a little bit so that the shadows would be reflected in the piece. The photographs and sketches are really just a visual reference point for me to do something that's realistic and that somebody can look at it and say, yes, I know that place, or I can visualize that place. The notes for me are just little hints that when I'm doing the work, whether it's a drawing or a painting or a lithograph, that it's a little reminder as to maybe change something if I don't like if there's been a case where maybe a building wasn't necessary there to capture that mood, so I would delete that building. Things like that, just little reminder notes that when I'm in the studio working on a piece, I'm aware of the changes that I want to make. The technique, I have my own technique, but it's secondary. The composition is really the most crucial part of the whole operation. So I will spend a lot of time composing the image that I'm going to draw or create. So if I'm doing my drawing, that's pretty much how I do it. It starts off with a pencil sketch and then an outline, and then filling in the detail and going through one by one. If I'm working on a lithograph, it's a little more complicated in that there's more steps because I'm producing a limited edition print. And the lithographs, it would possibly take about 2 weeks, I guess, in the studio to create that. Now that's not, of course, when I tell somebody it takes 100 hours of drawing or it takes 2 weeks of working in the studio to create a print, that doesn't take into account the amount of time it takes to go out and do the research to compose the image itself. Where I do black and white images of Jakarta, because I think of this very much as a black and white city. Or maybe I feel that way about most urban settings. And on the other hand, juxtaposed against the landscapes of Indonesia, because it is such a colorful and rich country. One of the turning points for me in those early years, this was like 90, 91, nothing more than wondering what I should do. I happened to look over the wall of the house that we were staying in at the time in Kampong, and I just did a very simple drawing of the roofs of the kampong that were right behind the wall. I'm living here, which is absolutely crazy street. I love it because it's such a Jakarta street. There's just so much life going on, and after all the years of having lived in this neighborhood, I still never get bored with going out on the street if I'm driving through or walking on it, just to watch humanity pass me by and all the activities, from the pasars to the little tokos and the warongs and what have you. There's just so much life going on here. So I find that a big inspiration. But I remember one scene just down the road from where McDonald's is in Kampong now, and as that little one-way stretch going between McDonald's Champion area down to Kemchik's, there was a mosque there that was right on the corner, and there was a bajai in the mosque, and it just seemed an interesting composition. I had taken the photograph, and it was about 6-8 months later that I decided to do the drawing, make a drawing of that scene. So I went back to it because it's near to where we live, and I thought, well, I'll just go back and study the situation a little more clearly, and sometimes, you know, make some notes or whatever, but just walk around and get a better feel for it. And I went back, and the place was empty. It was totally gone. And as it turned out, they did build another mosque on that site, a newer mosque. But something in the back of my head said, go back to some of the scenes that you have been shooting and start looking at what is actually happening in Jakarta. Especially the kampong buildings and just typical street scenes of a warung or what have you. These were scenes that had really, they weren't of any historical value. They hadn't been there that long. They didn't have any architectural value. So from a traditional heritage point of view, there wasn't a great deal of value there. But in fact, what they did represent was a social heritage, because this was really reflecting the people who had come to make this city grow so much. And so that again inspired me to start looking at the changes and what these changes really meant. So I became very involved, and it almost became a mission to try and capture as much of this as possible, all these changes that were happening. When I came through here, this particular scene really interested me because of the perspective and the fact that the close proximity of the homes. It really seemed like a very typical gang to me. I'm looking at my original drawing that I did based on a photograph probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And so this building here, of course, is completely changed, and the brickwork has been changed there. Some of the things, this wall is the one thing that reminded me, so it was interesting coming through here now to try, and it's sometimes difficult to locate some of the images that I have drawn or photographed many years ago. I have to be very sensitive. I'm walking into somebody's backyard. In some cases, I feel I'm walking into their living room. Some kampong life is so, you're so close to each other that virtually when you're walking down a small gang, you're stepping over bodies, and you're looking in the doorway of somebody's room, which is their house. First time I really became interested with Kali Ciliwung, of course, was on the train going to Bandung. And the train, when it goes between Manggarai Station and Jatinegara, crosses the Ciliwung. And I remember crossing it several times and looking down and seeing this very different type of life on the river, with all these little shanties crowded up onto the river, and some of these buildings up on bamboo stilts. It looked very exotic. The train to Bandung was the first introduction, and then once I went in, I found a whole world of material to play with in there. There were just so many scenes because the density of life on the Ciliwung was so, especially around Jatinegara, Manggarai, Kampung Melayu, all through that area. I kept going back. I would go in, I would photograph it, I would do drawings or paintings, or not paintings, but drawings and lithographs of the area, and then a year later I'd find I'd be inspired to go back again because I saw something else that made me want to do a little bit more. So I did a lot of
scenes from that area, just because I think it really best reflected the whole lifestyle of people who gravitate to river life in Jakarta.
This whole area almost needs like 3 chapters. In the beginning was just the fields and the kampong, and then the glass and steel towers went up, and now you're standing in the middle of a banana forest in the middle of Jakarta, just a couple hundred meters from Sudirman. So it's quite dramatic, even now, some years after taking the original photo and coming in here to look at the subject matter, that it's already growing up. So like nature, it's another chapter where nature is now taking over again, because in one place you look and you have just a jungle in the middle of the countryside, and you turn around and here's all these towers. So I'm just making some quick on-the-spot sketches of ideas to show this dramatic change between what was just a few years ago, it still is, and now with the new vegetation.
So I've kind of gone through periods. I started off being much more surrealistic in my depiction of Indonesia, and then I got into a very realistic period, and now I think I'm coming back more into symbolism and surrealism of showing the country. And this is one country that I think surrealism is maybe the most realistic way of understanding the country. And it's a country through its culture and through its heritage, I guess, that it probably has a very high appreciation of symbols.
What are you looking at?
Just looking at these photos, thinking about what we could do with, again,
Ken's been doing his artwork for a long time, and one of the things that is constant is that his work is very detailed. His work in Canada was probably a bit more surrealistic, although it was also landscapes, as it is here. And many people think of a landscape artist as somebody who paints mountains and scenery, and not so much the urban landscape. And that's one of the things that is different about what Ken has done here compared to what he did in Canada. He became very interested in recording the city of Jakarta. Before we came to Indonesia, we lived in China, and that was actually a bit of a dry period for Ken artistically. So it was very inspiring for him as an artist to be here. And he has many, many ideas, many more ideas than he'll have time to record in his lifetime, I think.
This area near.
One of the things that I hope is that his art will be looked at even by future generations, because it is recording something of Jakarta that is disappearing even before our eyes.
And so with all these people who have migrated into the city, bringing their country values or their values from other parts of the archipelago into Jakarta, that's partly what makes this such an interesting and vibrant city, is that you've got a huge melting pot of all the various peoples who live throughout Indonesia. To document this social heritage, as I call it, showing the buildings as the kampong, traditional kampong life in Jakarta. while it was disappearing, and all these glass and steel buildings were going up. There was that whole period of kind of having to get out and record it as quickly as possible because the changes were happening so fast.